All right, good morning. Welcome back, everyone. I'm sure everyone's feeling strong. I'm really delighted to be moderating this really important session on nature's crossroads, identifying clear pathways to preserving and recovering ecosystems. And this is a really important topic. We have phenomenal presenters and panelists. And the first one that I would like to welcome is Bardi from Club of Rome and World Academy of Arts and Science. So, Ugo, please.
So thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Where do I start from? Let's say I wanted to show you my T-shirt, which plays the role of a slide, but really this, you see, this is system dynamics modeling. It's a work that we, the Club of Rome, of which I'm a member, is famous for. This, what you see here, the results of a study made in 1972 that you may remember as the limits to growth. It is sort of, for the economy, sort of our colleagues do with the satellite. When you zoom on the Amazon rainforest with a satellite, you try to collect parameters and then model how the forest is evolving, changing, and hopefully not dying. And we do this for the economy. And this is a very general behavior that you can see here, the curves that go up and then down. It is a very general behavior of complex systems. The economy is a complex system. The ecosystem is a complex system. And there are various ways of approaching an ecosystem, a complex system, which I also call a holobiont, but that's another story. I will tell it to you another time. A complex system doesn't necessarily have to be complicated. You can simplify it. It is possible as long as you maintain the main elements of the feedback system that make the system run, move, change. And you can do this with the economy, and you can do it also for the ecosystem. The equations are very similar at a certain level. So, the metabolism of the human economic system, you can see it in here. The metabolism of the planet Earth can be summarized, and I think significantly summarized by these two equations. I'm sure you're happy to see a little chemistry. Nobody likes chemistry, but it's the system. It's not so complicated as long as you abstract it at this level. You recognize the upper equation as the photosynthesis process, which uses energy from the sun to generate oxygen, and CH2O is a representation of organic molecules in general, yourself. And then it is a cycle. It has to be a cycle because otherwise you would just accumulate organic matter and never destroy. So you have to go through this loop. The second equation, chemical equation, is the respiration equation that we all do normally, respire, and we consume oxygen and regenerate CO2. And this is, in thermodynamic terms, this is called a dissipative system. That was studied by, among others, by Ilya Prigogine. You might have heard of him. These are typical systems which exploit energy potentials from the H energy from the sun. Now, the interesting point here, and also here I'm simplifying a lot, but I think it is a meaningful simplification, because if you understand, in my modest opinion, why these three gases have exactly these percentages and not different ones, you understand most of what there is to be understood of the metabolism of the ecosystem. You can think, why these values? There is a reason. You cannot change it too much. A little, well, it's okay, but if you change this system, these values, the whole system can collapse and die. It may happen. And is this what we have? That's what we have been discussing about the role of water on climate, the role of CO2 on climate. There's a profound difference. CO2 has a negative feedback with temperature, H2O has a positive feedback. The risk with H2O is that you go into the wet greenhouse system and then you boil the oceans and everything dies in time. Not so soon. Not so soon. But anyway, we could discuss that for 10 days, but just a few notes about CO2. Now, since we're discussing communication, you know how people react to knowing that it is just a 0.04%. Wow, stupid. But why do you think that this will change the Earth climate? Well, it's even such a small amount is fundamental. Changes the behavior of the whole climate system. It's fundamental. One point is that to understand this, you have to see a little bit of some data. Okay, this is over a long time span. This is the whole Phanerozoic period for 560 million years, and you see this much more is approximate, but this, I think, in my opinion, these are the best data we have. So you see, oxygen had this great burst at the beginning of the Phanerozoic. Phanerozoic is the age of life. So life bursts out from on Earth, and oxygen too. Oxygen creates life. It's the food for life. We need oxygen. Try to stay without oxygen for a while, and you know that. Instead, CO2 goes down with time. Oxygen stops at a certain level. I think, and I think it's true, that you cannot go over about more than 22, 23, 25% of oxygen in the atmosphere. Otherwise, if you do, everything burns, and the problem solves itself, probably. CO2 instead goes down. And it has to, because the system regulates itself, facing a forcing which is caused by the increasing irradiation by the sun. You probably know that the sun irradiation has been increasing of about 10% every billion years. It's low, you don't have to worry about that in the short run, but over this span of time, the CO2 concentration has had to go down to reduce heating. This is the thermostat of the planet. And at present, we are very low levels because the sun beams a lot of light on us, and we are to a historical minimum over the Phanerozoic. This is also what we call a biotic regulation. It's one way the biota can regulate the CO2 concentration, but this is a geological regulation, not the biological one. Is on short term. On this time scale, it is effective because you bury carbon underground. And the first one who noted this story we're discussing exactly this today, say, oh, we're going down, we're low in CO2 concentration. And if without CO2, photosynthesis cannot occur. So everything is going to die, it's going to die. It was James Lovelock, you remember the name, the inventor of the Gaia phenomenon, another name for the way the biosystem, the ecosystem controls the parameters of the system. So he made a calculation, 1982, I think, something like that, and he said we only have about 100 million years before everything dies, because CO2 is going down, down, down. At some point, no more photosynthesis. He was a bit pessimistic, but it was a good idea. But it's more complicated than this. So we have this idea, and we were saying that is CO2 good or bad? It's a question also of communication, because some people say, I love CO2, I love CO2. I say, make love, not CO2. It's a failure of communication we have here, because clearly in politics, you cannot say a little bit nuanced concepts. It's either bad or good, left or right, communist or capitalist or whatever. And so we have to think about that, and I think we need even people who should know better sometimes are a little confused, because the idea that CO2 is a fertilizer, it is food for plants, is around. It is true. Actually, I was discussing with Dr. Chen yesterday, and there is such a thing as global greening. It is, but as Dr. The previous speaker, Dr. Lockley, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, said that we have a greening effect, a fertilizing effect, but it is tempered by a lot of other factors, like the flow of nutrients, like the increasing problems with regulating the water cycle and many things. So it's not at all obvious that it is a good thing, especially if you look around in the literature. There's no evidence whatsoever that this phenomenon is increasing food production. Some people say, okay, CO2 is good because we can produce more food, but it's not zero evidence that you can do that. Maybe you can increase a little bit. This LAI is leaf area index, which is fine. It increases, but that doesn't mean that you can do a lot. But I would like now to focus your attention on another point. On the other side of the action, respiration. Photosynthesis, respiration. And then you remember for your studies in chemistry that when you increase the concentration of a reactant on the left side of a reaction, the reaction goes faster. When you increase the concentration of a product, the reaction goes slower. It is true. And in this specific case, it is a fantastic story that I don't know if you ever had the time to learn, but once you discover it, it's one of those things that shock you. But you see, we are all metazoa. We transport oxygen from the lungs all the way to the body through this molecule, which is called hemoglobin. How do you pronounce that? Is this correct? Hemoglobin. Hemoglobin, which is a sort of truck. Picks up oxygen in the lungs, brings it everywhere in your body, and your brain too. And it deposits, but it does that by picking up CO2 and brings CO2 back to the lungs where it is released. The two things are not independent. If you die because of lack of oxygen, you don't die for lack of oxygen. Suppose you're a submariner. Any one of you is a submariner? No, I think not. But if people who die in submarines, they die not because of lack of oxygen, but because of CO2 poisoning. CO2 is food for plants within limits. As you know, the dose makes the poison. CO2, over certain limits, CO2 is a poison. And let's do this very details. CO2 is a bit optimistic, and 400 parts per million is not normal. It's something that is now, but it was not normal up to 100 years ago, or 50 years ago it was not. But you go, and I added the skull and crossbones, over 50,000, which is just 5%, you die. You die not because there is no oxygen in the atmosphere, but because the mechanism of transport in hemoglobin makes it impossible for you to transport enough oxygen to keep your brain alive. So you have to be careful, very careful with this thing. Let's say we love CO2. we love cyanide, okay? Small doses, it's okay, because we're facing a problem. And 2 minutes more, go ahead. And this, which is called the reverse Flynn effect, also known as global dumbing or global dumbing down. So people are becoming dumb. Is it true? Probably yes. Now the measurements are a little uncertain because you're measuring IQs, intelligence quotients, only some special regions of the world. We are not sure, but it is reasonably clear that we are losing a few intelligence points, and it is not a question of social factors or immigration or wealth, because this recent study was done on people, on brothers, people living in the same family, so even twins. So it is not genetic. And the most likely hypothesis is that we are losing points, intelligence points, because of this increase of CO2. And they correctly say in this paper, okay, if you are in a submarine, you can emerge and breathe. If you are in an atmosphere in this planet, maybe it explains why Elon Musk wants to go to Mars. I don't know.
Why did intelligence rise from 60 to 75?
Sorry?
Why did our intelligence rise between?
That's probably because of improved nutrition, improved wealth. It was called the Flynn effect. Flynn was a researcher. He operated in New Zealand and he made some measurements, and he was known for this idea. And for a certain period, from the 1970s to about recent time, 1990s, the intelligence quotient everywhere in the world was increasing. Then it started declining. It's always this behavior. I have proof that we are dumbing, absolute proof. I think there is no way to deny that we cannot be dumber than this, and it's getting worse. So, so far I think a couple of points of IQ is not a tragedy, but it's correct. If you have this, once you discover this kind of thing, am I living in a gas chamber? Am I? I don't know. Let's see. You see, here it's very good. We are 400 ppm in this room. It's not very precise, these measurements. But
how much is that?
it marks 400 ppm of CO2, but you don't have to trust it.
Yeah,
But it's good. But the sensor is open, so it is not precise. But in a crowded room, you can easily have 600, 700, 800, 1,000. If you keep your windows locked, then you go easily to 1,500. You can measure this with this kind of simple machines. And if you breathe into it, you can see it goes up very fast. But this is a big problem. And let me conclude with a note that going back to these measurements, what you discover if you take a ratio of oxygen to CO2 is that we are in a very special moment of the Phanerozoic era. There's never been a moment in the history of highly developed, complex creatures, metazoa, in which we had such a high ratio of oxygen to CO2, which I think it is significant. I think it has to be studied. It has not been shown anywhere. I made this plot, and I think I invite you to think about that if you tell me your opinion. But
this is before the rise of CO2?
Sorry?
This is before the industrial rise of CO2, this graph?
Or 2018.
It's now.
Oh, it should be going down.
No,
CO2 is going up.
Going up. Yes, it's still going up. But now of course it is going down. I see what you mean, because the zero it's before the CO2 emission. Now we are going down, probably going down. We don't know if it will be temporary or maybe we'll go up again or whatever. We still have 1 billion years to go.
Well, maybe in a few thousand years it will go.
Yeah, maybe, we don't know. But it may be the fact that we go back down with CO2 and that may destroy the complex brains of the planet, also the elephants. We were discussing elephants with Susan and Antonio. Because elephants are another case of very big brains, like dolphins. This is a peculiar moment in the history of Earth. Maybe the biotic regulation system is getting rid of big brains because they found that they were not a good idea. Maybe. In any case, just you see, there is a certain logic. These curves and that curve are rather similar, as I said. The increase of solar radiation is gradually forcing the system into that region where we don't want to go now, but in a billion years or so, we are forced to go into hell. Necessarily so. We don't want it to do it so fast now. And okay, I use this term. I'm closing here. If you like to discuss more this subject, we have a website. And we have a discussion group. If you're welcome to join. So a few of you are already in this discussion group. And just last note, this is important in view of geoengineering, because one section of geoengineering said that we don't care about CO2, we just shield solar radiation. But if we let CO2 grow, we can keep the temperature low using shielding, but all the bad effects still unknown on the brains or other parts of the animals' bodies will not be under control. And thank you very much. What was 15 minutes more?
Yeah, you're perfect. So what I'd like to do is invite Felipe up to get his video sort of set up, and then if people have a couple of quick questions. So maybe while Felipe is getting set up, if people have some quick questions, like I have one about the ratio that you just showed. In order for it to be up like that, knowing that CO2 is going up, oxygen would have to go up much, much more to get that ratio. So I just wanted to, I'm not sure how we got the ratio of O2 divided by CO2.
Oxygen is more or less stable. Doesn't change so much. The CO2 goes down. The last few million years of the
Oh, yours too. That was a very long time scale. Okay, yes, sorry. Thank you. All right. We'll now move on to Felipe Cassini. And Felipe is part of the biotic pump green movement, and also an agroforester and a journalist, so we're delighted. And we're going to endure the noise of lowering the shades quickly. And
yeah, first of all, thank you for the invitation, Anastasia, Andrei, Antonio, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here with such a brightest minds. And I work with a specific type of agroforestry. It's called successional agroforestry or syntropic agriculture. It's got to know like this. I have had the privilege to learn from Ernst Goetz, to work close together with him for the past almost 20 years. And first in Brazil, a lot of time. I mean, most of my career in Brazil, and then Portugal, Spain. And while we were in Portugal working in a very challenging place, the gentleman that is sitting over there called us to say that he was buying a land in Puglia, in Salento, in a place that has suffered still a strong phytosanitary crisis, and I just want to do this introduction because I think it's very relevant to the theme of this event, because there is a microcosmos of the apocalypse, because there was this disease that just devastated all the olives, so it changed not only the economy, but also, and above all, the cultural identity that people had with their landscapes, and the science could not act. They had some answers, but they were unable to act. And so it created a lot of conspiracy theories on the other side, and they were for 10 years fighting against each other. So from one hand, I mean, scientists were kind of insensible when they just painted, you know, like trees that were looking healthy, but with a cross sprayed in red, and so almost perfect for people to go there and take a picture to say those scientists want to destroy everything because the big pharma, because all the conspiracies came up. And so the place is challenging, and then Jan bought a place in this, and another two partners, and invited us a place with 0.5% organic matter in the soil, with salty water, and agriculture is completely dead in that place. And also the cultural identity is changed. So for us it was a very nice challenge. And of course, and then we made a video, and that is important. My presentation is going to be in video because until last minute I didn't know that I would be able to come. And so on Monday and Sunday we shot a video. Now we're just going to use it. And it's not, it's still a very young project, so it's like the oldest area is just 2 years, and the other ones we are just planting. It's not as luxurious as what Mingo showed. Very beautiful, by the way, very inspiring. And and so I hope you enjoy.
We are in the southernmost part of Italy, in the middle of the area affected by the olive quick decline syndrome, a disease linked to the bacteria Xylella fastidiosa that has devastated traditional olive groves in the region. Since 2013, this phytosanitary crisis has been dramatically altering the landscape, impacting economies and communities. We arrived at this farm in the fall of 2021, and we had to face not only this challenging context, but also some limiting local conditions. Soil analysis revealed we had less than 0.5% organic matter. The water was unfit for irrigation because of salinity. Biodiversity was very low. We could see standing just a few sick olive trees and sparse herbaceous coverage. And this coverage was unable to resist the summer, which means that the soil was left exposed during the most critical period of the year. This situation that I just described is local specific, but degraded lands are the indisputable result of agriculture. Cycles of exploitation historically have consumed the fertility and the resilience of every ecosystem on Earth. When agriculture becomes unviable in one place, whether due to financial difficulties or ecological limits, what happens is that areas are often abandoned. And nowadays, reforestation initiatives are left with the task of trying to recover the vegetation in those landscapes. However, there is a fundamental issue that is left aside on this dynamic. The pressure from the agricultural frontier does not disappear. It only migrates to other regions where there is still fertility and resources to be explored. In other words, it continues to impose pressure on areas that might also require protection. So the question is, should agriculture and preservation invariably compete for space? This is what much of the international debate about land sharing or land sparing leads us to believe. But here we want to present our concrete experience that shows that not only it is possible to carry out agriculture in degraded areas, but it's also possible to make this activity a vector for reforestation instead of a vector of destruction.
For the past 20 years, we've been working with a specific type of agroforestry, also known as syntropic agriculture. This approach embraces some ecological strategies that are often neglected by both farming and restoration efforts. One is a stratification, meaning the careful distribution of plants in layers, and the second is ecological succession. Despite the differences, both farmers and environmentalists can agree on how an ideal soil should look like. It should be rich in organic carbon, water-holding aggregates, readily available nutrients like phosphorus, nitrogen, potassium. The soil should also have a healthy social microbiome with higher fungal to bacteria ratio. So for the farmer, all those conditions combined translate into abundant harvest and less disease pressure. For environmentalists, on the other hand, this ideal state reflects basically a healthy forest ecosystem, one that effectively captures carbon and maintains crucial water and nutrient cycles, ultimately contributing to climate stability. In order to achieve such conditions, both parties would agree that everything begins with photosynthesis, a lot of photosynthesis. After all, more photosynthesis per unit area results in more carbon conversion into organic molecules. It also means more biomass production, more root exudation, more food for soil organisms, more nutrient cycling, more soil protection against direct rain, sun, erosion, compaction. And going on with the same logic, if we want all that, it would be a very smart decision to increase photosynthesis per unit area, again, regardless if our goal is agriculture or reforestation. And we achieve that with multi-layer designs. In all ecosystems, there are plants with different heights and also with different light and shade preferences. Some plants like to reach for the sun in full exposure, others prefer some hours of shade, and others closer to the ground might thrive completely filtered light. So why not combine them? If we understand that each leaf works as a mini solar panel, this distribution pattern we see here tends to maximize overall photosynthesis in the system. Rather than just having one layer of monoculture, here we have at least 5. And the occupation is denser in the lower layers and it is sparser as we move upwards, allowing some filtered light to reach near the ground. It means that farmers need to start seeing their croplands as complex ecosystems and not only aim at the most profitable plant, and reforestation projects should question whether the focus on planting only the most attractive species is behind the low survival rate that these initiatives tend to record. The second criterion we adopt is ecological succession. Plants not only have different heights and light demands, but also have different life cycles. Some plants finish their cycle in 30 days, others in a few months, 1 year, 2 years, 4, 5, 50, 500. So what keeps us from designing our systems predicting that a longer living, slower growing group of plants will succeed a shorter one after its cycle ends? That would prevent any interruption in the photosynthesis biomass exudate provision. There would be always a new consortium of plants ready to take the next shift. That's what nature does. For example, people get a little shocked when they see us planting eucalyptus and other exotic species in our systems. But in our interpretation, eucalypt is not a problem in itself. The mistake is to plant them without adding together a slow-growing climate species to take its position in the future. Here, we planted together with eucalyptus and poplars a seed of an oak tree. Slow-growing oaks don't appreciate growing in the open field. They are climax. They need the protection and nurture of a previous faster-growing trees that create the proper conditions for them to grow. After some years, we harvest the eucalypt, and the young oak is now ready to occupy the emergent layer in our designs above the canopy of our fruit trees.
In natural situations, after a forest clearing, a huge variety of plants grow together. Some of them are extremely fast and prevail at the very beginning. They create the conditions, food and shelter, for slower growing ones to emerge. Each plant manifests itself in a given space, meaning its optimum layer, and at a given time, which means the successional step in which it performs best. This is what we replicate in our managed fields. By doing that, cycle after cycle, harvest after harvest, the place improves rather than degrades.
Okay, here is a good example of how we want to distribute the layers in this place here. I mean, we have the poplar that is going to occupy the emergent layer that will be on top of this existing citrus. We have already this extremely beautiful oak tree, Quercus ilex, that is growing under, that will occupy the poplar's position maybe in 5, 6, 7 years. And going on, we have 2 types of lavender. we have salvia. In the more medium layer, this Buddleia santolina. This is another Asteraceae cineraria maritima that is so beautiful. And we have our fruit tree here, a loquat, already full of little fruits. Here, another Mediterranean bush, which is a Pistacia lentiscus, that will occupy the median layer, but a little bit further in the future. That is now being taken by the strawberry tree. We have another lavender, another salvia, and a poplar, making the protection. When reforestation institutions come to visit us, they get surprised. Basically, all the species they use in their projects in the Mediterranean region, we also have in our agricultural designs. Here on this farm, for example, we are growing on average 8,000 plants per hectare, including seasonal and perennial vegetables, fruit trees, other fast-growing trees and bushes, all sorts of Mediterranean aromatics and climax forest trees. Such high density is only possible when we embrace succession and stratification. Although it is still a very young project, we already have quite interesting results.
Our soil organic matter increased fourfold in only 1.5 years. We also reduced drastically the use of water compared to traditional approaches. In the first year, for example, we only irrigated our fields 8 times. Our wish is to reduce to 0 over the years. It's counterintuitive because we learn in school that many plants growing together will compete for water and will compete for nutrients, but what we see in the field is a different story. The right match of plants can provide ecological recovery while producing food, and the appropriate management practices can make this process faster than what happens in passive regeneration. This is the recovery by use concept provided by the syntropic approach.
In this presentation, we tried to defend that it is possible and needed, when applicable, to conciliate reforestation efforts and agriculture through complex and successional agroforestry or syntropic restoration schemes. Since 2019, after we started collaborating with Antonio and later Anastasia, Andrei and others, we also understood the promising potential this approach can play concerning the biotic pump. We have an optimistic path ahead of us. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Felipe. I love this session because it really shows the range of opportunities across our landscapes. And so the next speaker is Michael Kellett. He is formerly the Northeast Director of the Wilderness Society and the current Executive Director of Restore the North Woods. And he's going to talk about opportunities for new national parks and the power of national parks and what they can provide for us and species and the planet. So I think, Michael.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here with such an illustrious group of people. I really learned a lot. And, so I wanted to provide a perspective on, we've talked about the problem, a lot of problems, we talked about some solutions, and what we're working on is solutions that we think are applicable to a lot of places that are not at all pristine, but are places that have been lived in landscapes for quite a long time, but that there's a lot of promise in the future. So and I won't go into why forests are important. Unfortunately, previous people have told us about that, and if you saw the film that was shown the other day, that says it all in terms of what we have to work with in New England, and I'm mainly focusing on New England right now. So if you don't know where New England is, there it is in the first place that Europeans landed in the what's now the United States. And most of the landscape was originally old growth forest, mixed hardwood and some softwood forest. By the 1800s, late 1800s, it was pretty much all turned into farms and fields. But in the early 1900s, most of the farms were abandoned because there wasn't great farmland. People moved west to Ohio and Pennsylvania and so forth. And so the forests have, in a huge part of New England, have just been left alone. They're recovering through proforestation, as Susan's work had coined the word proforestation, but just basically leaving a forest alone and letting it come back. And the red arrow is about where the general forest regionally is right now, age-wise. So it's really reaching what has been defined as the beginnings of recovered old growth forest. But right now, of course, because there are all these beautiful recovering old growth forests, there's a lot of interest now in logging those forests for timber products. And although there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that, and we need wood and so forth, but here's, for example, a national forest, White Mountain National Forest. This is owned by the public. They're logging all of these public lands like this. So this is not, obviously, this is not a natural forest, it's not a reserve. It's an industrial landscape. Another threat is restoration, and we've talked about restoration, but in this case, what you see on the left is what was happening with this forest that had been farmed and grazed for a long time. This is in Plymouth, Massachusetts, one of the first places that was cleared. On the right is a restored landscape, and Susan and I co-authored a publication that talked about this whole thing. There's a big problem with saying, oh well, the forest was cut down, it's growing back, and there's not enough open habitat. So all these species that need the open habitat are declining, and we have to create open habitat. So there are a couple problems with that. Number one, that kind of habitat, like a savanna, never existed naturally in New England. There's really no evidence it ever existed. Most of the landscape was old growth forest. Excuse me, so open landscapes were relatively rare. The species that used them were relatively rare. And so what happened is when you cleared the landscape, species that like open habitat, woodcock and grouse, boomed. They were boosted, their populations zoomed upward, and then as the forest grew back, they declined. And so they're going, oh no, they're going to go extinct, we're losing. Well, they're not going to go extinct, they're just going back to normal numbers. But there's this thing going on now where they're taking forests that are, just about getting to be old growth and mowing them down for species that are not endangered. So now's the time where we have to make decisions about the future of these forests. Susan talked about this report that she was involved in. The key here is if you see the darker green pieces in New England, that's the potential for expanded protected areas. So here, this is the most densely populated part of the United States, but theoretically, 25% of the landscape could be protected if we do something, but only about 3% is right now protected, and that's the real dark areas, and most of that is not permanent. I can't reach it. If you look up there, that big dark blob, that's in Maine, and that's Baxter State Park, which the former governor bought this land, just left it alone. It's been left alone for decades and decades, and it's beautiful, it's amazing. Next to that is a national monument, which was the result of work that I was involved in, where we proposed a big national park up there, and The whole thing didn't happen, but the president created a big national monument. That's now protected. So that's an area about the size of Rocky Mountain National Park out in western U.S. So, you know, what's the goal of protection? We can go around and around about the imperfections of all these different things. The 30 by 30, there's a lot of concern about indigenous people, and that's a valid concern. That's not really an issue in New England, but it's certainly something that's got to be a part of protecting land globally, but we need some kind of a goal. And in New England, 30% is doable. It's doable. So we've said, let's try for 30% of New England. And when we're talking about protecting, it's basically GAP 1, GAP 2, or IUCN 1, 2, 3, and 4, and these are basically national parks, wilderness, reserves, places that are not open to commercial resource exploitation. They don't need to exclude people. They don't need. There can be subsistence use to some extent. Only about 17% of the earth meets this standard now. Now, as we can see, like in the Amazon, there are a lot of indigenous lands that are not in this because it's not internationally recognized as protected. So that's a problem, and that needs to be dealt with. But even if those were all included, it still wouldn't be even probably 30% of the planet. So, excuse me, I'm getting dry here. In the U.S., it's only about 12, 13%. So we've been working on one solution. It's not the only solution, but is to create some new national parks. And this is the Maine Woods, the area I was talking about. This is still not protected. But you can see this was all cut over. When Henry David Thoreau lived in New England, this was all open timberland, had been just mowed down, pretty much. So Yellowstone is the world's first national park, 1872, and it was created basically because of geysers and so forth, but what we've learned now is by protecting this huge area, which is about 5 million hectares, I should say the park itself is about, what, 1 million hectare. But the green around it is public land. And so the park itself has been protected since 1872. It's basically the most intact ecosystem in the lower 48 United States, and one of the most in the temperate zone today. And it was just inadvertent. They just drew a line around it, left it alone. The green around it is being degraded by forestry and grazing and so forth. So we're proposing, let's make all that green a bigger national park, the whole thing. And so the vision of what national parks are went from being sort of an important thing where people could go to enjoy nature and whatever, but now we realize that they automatically benefit the climate, benefit biodiversity, benefit people in lots of ways. But this is where national parks are right now. In the U.S., the green are the larger parks, and there aren't, as you can see, in the West is where most of the parks are. The East, there are very few national parks. Here's where public lands are, though. So all the colored lands there, various colors, are owned by the American people. The public land. There are reservations, tribal lands too, so that's a different category, but those are the dark brown, anyway, they're in there too, but most of this is public domain land. It includes national parks, but for example, that yellow is Bureau of Land Management lands, which are totally multiple use. They're open to mining, fracking, grazing, logging, whatever. But what if we change the use of these lands? What if we increase their protection? So we've proposed 100 new national parks across the country. This would triple the size of the existing national park system, which it would add about 75 million hectares of protected land. And most of this, 3/4 is public lands. But as you can see, we've got a lot in the east. A lot of that is maybe state land. There's some public land. But this is doable. This is not, it's a political problem, not a physical problem to do this. And in the Northeast, in New England, we've proposed 9 national parks. And they're not all, the main woods up there, that's mostly big industrial timberlands that are now owned by real estate investment trusts and venture capitalists, and so those are lands that could be acquired. You know, a couple $1 billion to buy the whole thing, probably. And this is a proven, just buying these areas and mostly leaving them alone has been done before. So Adirondack Park, which is a state preserve in New York, was created in 1892, and it's probably the most healthy ecosystem in New England. I think there's no question, and it's a huge area. They're talking about potentially restoring wolves, which were killed off, of course, but they're bear, they're all moose, all kinds of species. Further south, Great Smoky Mountain National Park, in 1934, this was all, excuse me, this was all mowed down. This has just grown back. They just let it grow. And now it's a UN Biosphere Reserve. It's one of the most biodiverse places in the whole temperate zone, southern temperate zone. So it can work. So here's the proposed Maine Woods Park, and on the right there's this national monument I was talking about. There are these wild rivers that are, because they were just timberland, they just let the rivers. They just left the rivers. There are some dams, but this is slowly, we hope, becoming a huge new national park in the east, which is within a day's drive of about 50 million people in the U.S. and Eastern Canada. And people say, oh, this might not be possible. How can you ever do this? So the American National Park System, which I showed you, last year 326 million visits to these parks. Now, so that's about the same as the entire U.S. population. It's not this, some of the same people, of course, went multiple times, but that's a lot of visitors. And in fact, there's a big concern that there's parks are too crowded. They're getting overrun. They're loved to death. So, but the Pew Research Center does every couple of years, I think, a survey asking people how favorable or unfavorable they are to federal agencies and departments. And at the top, in the red, there is National Park Service. And it kind of goes back and forth with the Postal Service, the mailman. Those are the two top things. Above NASA, above Social Security Administration, where people get paid. So there's a lot of political support. There's not been leadership to really do this. And so what we're doing is talking to groups around the country. There are a lot of places where other groups are looking at their area for potential parks. And we're a little group, we don't have much money, so we can't make this happen. But we're saying to them, look, this is possible, you can do it. Look what we did in Maine. This is really, this is a positive response. Don't feel like you can't save your place. So we've talked about what we can do beyond, on the global scale, how we can sort of change the paradigm here. And I don't know about these existing institutions. They haven't been exactly changing things in a big way, but you've got IUCN World's Park Congress, which is going to be happening between 2024 and 28. Supposedly the world's premier global forum for setting the agenda for protected areas. So it seems like maybe we could connect with them somehow. Who knows? And COP16 is going to be happening in Colombia this year, in Cali, maybe most important biodiversity summit on the planet. Again, a lot of people are very skeptical of whether any of these things can ever lead to anything, but who's who's really gone with a protected area agenda and thought through all the concerns that people have, as well as the positive potential impacts. So, anyway, that's what we're doing, and we think we can make some progress. So, thanks for listening.
Yes, question for Michael.
Yeah, just a comment. I wanted to say about the skepticism that, as you say, many people may be skeptical that we can propose 100 new national parks, but I suggest that probably even more people are skeptical that we can continue the way we are going without doing anything about it.
Thank you, yes. I totally agree with that. And that's what we say to people is, you know, what's the alternative? Right.
Oh, yeah, can you please open it? Yes, thank you. So we have two more speakers and then our panel. And the next speaker is going to be Jürgen Vogel. He is the division head of forestry here in Bavaria. I learned this morning from Jürgen that he's actually been to the US and been to Trinity. We're not sure, since there's actually 3 different Trinities in the US and 1 in Dublin, we're not sure if he's been to Trinity College at IMAT or the one in DC. But anyway, he went on a tour of some forests in the US some years ago.
Okay,
So please, you're going to
thank
have
you for
about 10-15 minutes.
giving me some minutes for a speech.
Please.
I came to this very by accident over Josef Wochesli and Jan Pokorny and Andrei, and we'll have an excursion on Saturday in my forest area. So, hopefully, yes, it works.
Yeah.
So, I'm head of a local forest companies. I'm responsible for about 17,000 hectares, which means 117,000 cubic meters annual cut, and means 10 million annual turnover, and means 70 employees. About forestry in Germany. Germany has about 32% of the landscape and 11.4 million hectares of forest land. About one half is conifers, and the rest is deciduous trees. If you look here at the map of Germany, you see the little blue and white colored thing that is Bavaria, and Bavaria has 2.5 million hectares of forest land, which is 35%, and these 35% divide up into 54% private forests, about 12 communal forests, 2% of federal forest land, which is mostly military, and 30% of the Bavarian state forest. We are responsible for 800,000 hectares of forest land, and I think what the relevance is in this area, we have high population density, other than the 77 persons per square kilometer. In Finland there are 16 persons. On the other hand, Bavaria is I call it the timber giant. Nearby 1 billion cubic meters of standing stock is here in Bavaria, and together with Baden-Württemberg we have about 43% of the forest standing stock in Germany. The thing is, private forests in Bavaria, there are 700,000 owners, and about 180,000 of them own forests smaller than 1 hectare. So, you know, these are little national parks, minimum half of them, but some of the owners do not use where their forest land is lying, nor do they use it in any way. On the other hand, in 2005, there was a reform of the forest system, the forest organization system, and there was set up the Bavarian State Forest Service, the Bavarian State Forest Company, and we are responsible for the state forest land, and we are responsible for about 800,000 hectares of forest land, and we see us in a history of more than 250 years of sustainable forest management, which was maybe invented by the Saxonian mountaineer Karl von Kallowitz in the 1750s. Here there's a map of the Bavarian area, and all the colored spots is every one of these colored spots is one of the 41 local forest companies, and I have the honor to be the head of one of them. You know, we have 800,000 hectares. We have an allowable cut of nearly 5 million cubic meters per year. We have an annual growth of about 6 million cubic meters a year. That means 100,000 cubic meters can stand without management. This is, you may know, this is mostly in the mountain areas or wherever it is not so easy to come there. On the other hand, we have an understanding of sustainable forestry, and this, we call it close to nature forestry, and it means minimized planting, no clear cutting, selective cutting with natural regeneration. It means protection of old forests and habitats, which is in the moment about more than 10%, which is not managed within the managed forests as a interlinked system. And we try to have mixed forests anywhere. We try and do soil protection. This means, exemplar grata, skidding lines, and only on these skidding lines machinery may drive. Yes, and every 10 years we have a management planning and also controlling and monitoring it so that can be done what is planned. I will go over this. What we now, yes, we have challenges, you know, we have the climate crisis and the climate change, and on the other hand we have different political developments who try to management is done. So these are maybe the concerns we have. Middle Europe or Germany, or especially Bavaria, has nearly no primary forests. Every square meters is owned by somebody. This is closely interlinked because all kinds, classes of owners, and so we need integrative and near natural forestry over the entire area, and so the establishment of stable, efficient mixed forests. You see, it's maybe the same thing. You see on the left, these are pure spruce stands. In many places the start, and after we're doing this not from yesterday but from maybe 40, 50 years, and down there the start is under planting or naturally generating under that old understore, and the big picture on the right side shows you what it might look. You have young trees, old trees, thin trees, thick trees on the same area, and when we do cutting we care for the young ones not to damage them. Yeah, and you know, one thing is necessary in this area, and it's easy. It's planting, cutting, hunting. And in the state forest land, 90% of our area is hunted self-managed, and only 10% is on lease. So we can decide on that harvesting plans, making these harvesting plans and get them allowed by the authorities. We can do it. And the other hand is cutting and selling. And timber sales means 90% of the total sales we do, and since some years we are allowed to set these revenues aside to investigations in the climate forest. Yes, I think that was it for the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jürgen. And then before we start our panel, we have a special treat, which will actually be some poetry. And I'm delighted to welcome Rachel Donnell, who has a very popular podcast in 163 countries called Planet Critical. She's been trying to explore why the planet is in crisis. She's also a climate corruption journalist. So please, Rachel, thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad there's been so much talk of philosophy and art and love over the past 24 hours, because that hopefully justifies what I'm about to do today. The bias I have towards the world is a linguistic one. I see curves poking out of the soil among roots. Poetry draped across the back of a chair as a lover plays with the hair of his sweetheart. Words giggling in the silence, bunching themselves together like a flirtatious flock of sparrows. I believe humanity is a symbolic species, both liberated and bound by those symbols, navigating an existential tightrope amongst the forest canopy from which we so readily fall, wrapping ourselves in dogma as if words can turn the rocks below into dust. And, in a sense, words can. Words alchemize the world around us, and us with it. I have often wondered if what Eve and Adam found in the garden was language itself, the essence of story. And so they covered themselves with leaves because the words bustling within us push the very hairs out of our bodies. Words to me are alive. They seek to enter the world. Any poet will tell you words arrange themselves on the page as if intelligent, as if conscious. Language lives with us, in us, and births us as much as we birth it. Yet another signature of this planet's symbiosis. We find parts of ourselves in the arch of the letter A, or the crucifix of the T, built as they are from our own DNA. We trace our evolution, not only of the world, but our understanding of the world, and thus ourselves. We can see what was left behind and what was lost by force when we grabbed on too tight to the world around us rather than letting it slide through our grasp like poetry, like water. Eternal wellspring of momentum and possibility. We damned the wordways like we damned the waterways. Poetry damned, souls too. It is no surprise to me that the extended attack on nature coincides with an attack on language. I could give many examples of authoritarian regimes prone to extraction from populace and natural resources banning books, but I also refer to the ugly atomization of language as we move from prizing poetry to prizing technicality, and then on to the very mistrust of metaphor, which has resulted in the suspicion of truth itself, as if there ought not to be vagaries in the world, no mysticism or surprise, no meaning as it speaks to each of us individually. No vagaries are to run through these capillaries. The word ought to be boundaried tightly, like the land itself. Meaning must never run away with itself. What use are wild horses, anyway? Meaning is a part of nature like wildness is a part of nature. There is no meaning without wildness, for meaning is that which sprawls, which spills, which creeps and entangles and appears. Meaning is the daisy pushing up through a crack in the pavement. It is the bush pushing through the fence. It is the sound of birds through triple-glazed windows, and the wind waving the trees. Meaning is the world bursting at material seams, the relationship between, that which would be so much easier to manage if we could keep separate. Our hearts, our ideas, the needs of nature itself from the needs of our own. Imagine just if we could breed meat without life, a food supply without the need for care. Yes, the world would be much easier if it stayed to its boundaries, but it would be utterly meaningless, made tame. Language made tame is meaningless. We made tame are meaningless. Our industrialized populations with our seemingly limitless knowledge and energy abundance and machinery which alchemizes anything we need from the earth cannot seem to figure out how to save it from ourselves. Yet indigenous populations, who make up just 5% of our species, steward 80% of the world's biodiversity. They do not have the technology, the energy, the engineering know-how, but their libraries are in the forests, their data carried in the DNA of their languages, languages bursting with verbs and metaphor and poetry, language which sings and dances with winds underneath the canopy, language that welcomes complexity to wrap itself around the world, fluttering under the sun, whereas our own seeks to pin it to the wall, butterfly wings gathering dust, preserved. Preservation in this context is prescient, for we preserve that which is dead, binding bodies in cloth out of loyalty to a past that no longer exists. Bound again, and we wonder why the seams fray. We wonder why life, hobbled, collapses into herself, toes curled underneath the ball of her feet as she was forced to move quietly through the world so as not to disturb death. Tamed, denatured, neutered, this is violence. In English we speak of senseless violence, violence for which there is no reason. Yet violence is only sensed. We feel violence sparking across our nervous system. Our limbs tremble